When I talk about understanding the law, I'm not talking about saying, do I understand clause 5I of this act? Although I do think that is important. I think it's about, do I understand clause 5 of this act and the humanity that has given rise to this? And I think that a combination of the way that lawyers are first trained, and then the way that we very rapidly get sucked into that ecosystem, and then the way that we do not have adequate time to either understand what is written in the black letter or consider how that is likely to apply, I think all of these hold us back and limit the development of where we can be as a profession.
Welcome to Legal Off The Leash, the podcast where we take the legal profession out of the box and into a happier, more fulfilling future.
We're your hosts, Scott Simmons and Elizabeth de Stadler. On today's episode, we're talking Africa's Big Five in lawyer form with Tom Fleuriot. Tom is a legal operations consultant for in-house legal teams who likes fast implementation, structured thinking, and cheese. Tom spent almost a decade in commercial roles for a FTSE 100 engineering company, then almost a decade in legal roles for a FTSE 100 FMCG company. In 2024, he set up as a legal operations consultant for in-house legal teams under the banner Floxam. Floxam applies structured thought models to drive simple and impactful change to in-house legal, whether policies, processes, playbooks, templates, technology, tools, or systems. He also posts on LinkedIn about ideas to make life easier for in-house lawyers and, as previously mentioned, which we will discuss, cheese. Tom, welcome to Legal Off The Leash.
Thank you. Delighted to be here.
Right. So, Tom, we love guests that have different takes on what's going on in the legal profession. Elizabeth and I think you've got one of the most interesting with this Big Five idea. Why don't you start by telling us how the idea came to you? Because as soon as you mentioned the author, I was all in.
He's easy. He's easy like that.
I think one of the most fun things that you can possibly do in the workplace is taking metaphors and ideas and running with them as far as you can. Ideally, if you're in a meeting, in the opposite direction, right? This idea came to me where I was reading to my daughter the book The Ugly Five by Julia Donaldson. And for those who don't know,
it's one of my favorites.
It's one of her better ones, right? I think that, I mean, I wouldn't say it's my favorite. It's not my exact favorite, but it's certainly it's well up there, right? In terms of, you know, the rhythms. When you're asked to read the same book about 30 times, you do reach point like, how do I elevate this a little bit?
One of my favorites, actually, I don't know whether it's because I used to love Charlie Cook's favorite book. I used to sort of deliberately choose that one to read to the kids and What the Ladybird Heard. So I used to pick those sort of two, and the other one was Squash and a Squeeze. God, I used to love that.
You have the one there's a stick man in it.
Stick man.
So that one makes me cry like every single time. Like I'm so moved by that story.
Right, okay, now if you'll permit me a minor digression to make the point here, right? Okay, so this is I don't know how you feel about things like tarot and horoscopes and the Myers-Briggs test and all these kind of made up things that are designed to, yeah, right, okay. And as I was reading The Ugly Five, in the back of The Ugly Five, they have three other types. They said the Ugly Five is inspired by the Big Five, which is the five beasts on the savannah that historically are the most difficult to kill. You've also got the Little Five, and then you've got, I think there's a fourth five, but I can't remember what it is off the top of my head. And it occurred to me that the Big Five in particular act as quite a useful metaphorical lens for lawyers and how lawyers can behave. And so this idea just slowly sort of like grew in my brain over a period of time. And I like using it in the same way that I feel that things like tarot and horoscopes and Myers-Briggs, these are lenses through which you can look at your actions and you can test yourself. And because of the richness of the metaphor of these five animals, it offers quite a lot of richness in terms of both positives and where as a profession we can be at our best, and negatives as to where we can be at our worst. That's the general idea. Is it allows us, when we feel that we're not succeeding, asking ourselves, am I manifesting one of these animals? Could I do better at bringing another animal out and doing more with that animal in this scenario? I think it's quite a fun way to play with the idea.
So could you take us through the five and from your thinking what each of them means and how they play out?
I was going to say preferably in rhyme. Do it, Julia Donaldson
really want to rise to the occasion on this. I'm not sure that I can. The big five, and we can approach them in any sequence we want, but the big five are effectively the elephant, the rhinoceros, the lion, the leopard, and the buffalo. In terms of what they represent, and again, you can run with this metaphor as hard and fast as you want, but to me, I think when I go with the buffalo, I think about the tendency towards a herd mentality and to follow the crowd. When I think about the leopard, I think about the opposite, which is the desire to be solitary, to always have a unique set of spots. When I think about the rhinoceros, I think of something that can be a little short-sighted, a little bit prone to charge. When I think about the lion, I think about pride. And then when I think about an elephant, I think about the elephant in the room. And I think with lawyers, the elephant in the room can often be the question of how much we actually understand the law before we start talking and before we start doing. With me, where I have successfully addressed all of these five potential failings, and they're all failings I have exhibited and continue to exhibit at time, right? So this is not me throwing shade or attacking other lawyers, but certainly whenever I catch myself at risk of doing one of those things and being able to challenge myself on it, that tends to make my legal service delivery more effective.
So are these fixed traits, do you think? Or can you change them about yourself?
I think that it's really interesting. There's been a lot of talk, like you see all the Eileen Gu stuff about neuroplasticity, and I'm not saying, obviously she's not the fundamental theorist behind it, but she's just quite current at the time of recording this. So I think that we should believe in neuroplasticity. I think that we should believe in self-awareness. We should also acknowledge that there are some things that we find that different people find more challenging to do and less challenging to do as well. And frankly, I think humans have only just started scratching the surface of the question of what's under the lid in our heads, and I'm certainly not in a position to have a strong opinion on any of that. But having said that, I'm now gonna put out my entitled opinion on that kind of stuff, which is based on nothing other than the fact that I have a microphone right now. For me, and from what I have seen in colleagues, I think that while there can be tendencies towards certain creatures in each person, I think they manifest themselves differently at different times. I think we can be products of this particular circumstances we face, and it can be as simple as, have you had your coffee that morning? Or have you had some bad news just before you're going in somewhere, or whatever? Sometimes you spark with people, sometimes you don't. So I'm not saying that, I don't think that I could say, I wouldn't want it to become a categorization of that person is 20% lion or anything like that. And I think a lot of the problems with a lot of the psychometric testing at the moment, a lot of the problem, again, if you'll permit me a small digression, a lot of the problem with the entire way society is discussing social media and algorithms is this assumption of humans as fixed concepts that fails to factor in both time and external factors and internal factors. We are all changeable beings, and it's good that we're changeable beings. It's good that one day I want to listen to rap and one day I want to listen to classical music, and it's good that I can't tell you which I want when. Right, that we should embrace that. And I think there's interesting aspects to the law where, when you look at the best laws in the world actually acknowledge the fact that the human experience is so variable and has so many different factors, where two things that are almost identical can nonetheless produce different outcomes of justice and fairness. So in terms of are these animals with any of us? Well, it's like, well, no, of course they're not. But I think that it's still an interesting lens. In the same way, for doing tarot, you flick over the hanged man. The way that you interpret the hanged man for yourself in your circumstance at that point in time might be different to how you'd interpret the same card turning over the next day. And that's okay. I stress I don't do tarot every day, right? Just don't think that. But I'm saying for these kind of lenses.
It's so interesting to me that you called it the Big Five, because of course, well, I don't know if people know this, but one of the underlying sort of assessments that is used in psychology, so not primarily designed for psychometry, is the Big Five traits. And what I like about that is the traits are not fixed, but they are your default, and situations and whether you've already had breakfast, things like that, can change how you behave in the moment. But your default is quite steady. It doesn't change unless there's massive intervention, like 10 years of therapy or stuff like that. But I just find it really, this is an aside, I find it really interesting that you also landed on the Big Five. I assume you didn't think about the Big Five personality traits assessment. Or did you?
I didn't. I'm far too ignorant for that. So this is pure kind of reactive,
Yeah.
reading a Julia Donaldson book, and that's what came out. Although obviously it's
It's
already
fu-
called the
it's-
Big Five, right? Had it been the Big Six, I'd have found a way to shoehorn that in instead.
Something that you mentioned, though, just now that has been really sticking with me. You say that we're not fixed. All of this that we do change depending on lots of different things around us. And you mentioned social media, and it really did just hit me thinking there's so much talk out there about trying to game the algorithm, trying to play up to the algorithm, to do what the algorithm wants you to do. And you get a lot of these people telling you, do this, do that. And you think, because we're being told how we should be on these platforms, is that a reason why a lot of people actually don't contribute to it, don't write posts, don't comment? Because actually those things that the algorithm, that people are telling us the algorithm want us to do, those people don't fit into those boxes. They don't fit neatly, comfortably doing those things that they're told they should be doing to get loads of views or get loads of engagement. And actually, if we did just post when we wanted to, when we felt like it, didn't do it to boost engagement, just posted in the way that we wanted to, actually probably what we might get is maybe a more colourful, maybe more enjoyable experience, both as the person posting and commenting and as the people who are reading and engaging with those posts.
I think it's an interesting idea. And yeah, I like that point. Certainly for me, about 9 months ago now, I kind of stopped trying to use LinkedIn as a sales thing and just started saying, you know what, I'm going to try and push some content that I find interesting out there. And I'm going to stop caring about individual posts and how they do. I do think one of the challenges is the dopamine hit that you get when a post does well, right? And I think so there is this interesting thing where rather than, I think people talk about the social media algorithms as though they're designed to bring out the best of humanity. I think they're designed to distill us into an oversimplified articulation of ourselves. And they force us down that avenue. So it's like, you look at the way that everyone talks about the recent LinkedIn changes, where it's like, well, okay, you need to be consistently talking about the same audience in order to have any kind of coverage. And it's like, but why? I mean, take this into relationships, right? I have friends who I love talking about football with, who I would never talk about films with, like at the most basic level. I also have friends that I talk about a certain type of film with that I'd never talk about another type of film with, right? So the idea that we should be allowing ourselves to be classified in that way and structured in that way just seems to me to be the fundamentally flawed concept of a load of tech bros who can't cope with the idea of the inherent beauty of complexity.
That's a quote.
That is.
I
Do
didn't
you know
expect
what?
us to be going here today.
But it's so good,
It
Tom.
is very good.
Thank
Great
you.
quote.
I mean,
I feel I should be more drunk. I say more drunk, just to be clear. It's the middle of the day. I'm not drunk. I've not drunk any
You
alcohol.
said more drunk.
Yeah, you said more drunk.
More than zero.
Right. Okay. All 5 of them are incredibly interesting. The 2 that really stick out for me, because I think there is so much of it that goes on in the legal profession, which I think also plays to your, plasticity of people and situations, were the buffalo and the leopard. Because I think what we see a lot of in the legal profession is those 2. And I think we see it a lot going on with AI, is as with any form of technology or any form of movement forward for the legal profession, once one goes, others then go and go and go, because everyone goes, well, they've done it, so we probably shouldn't be left behind, so we'll do it as well. And actually, I don't know whether it's herd mentality or kind of that lemming mentality, actually, now that I'm thinking this through, which is we're just going to follow no matter where it kind of goes, even if it's off a cliff, because we don't actually know why we've invested in this thing other than them down the road have done it. The other one with the leopard, which is, and we talk about this a lot on this show, is this how siloed lawyers are and legal departments, practice areas are. And those are the 2, therefore, that have really hit me instantly, because we see so much of those in the legal profession.
Yeah, so I think and I think what's interesting is they can actually both manifest in the same person for slightly different circumstances. And certainly, I really want to be emphasizing throughout this that this is not an attack on anybody, right? It's something that I feel myself doing, where I've felt this sort of need to bend and to sort of curve and run with people, even when I've known that it's probably not the most sensible thing to do. Although actually just staying on that for a bit, sometimes it is the most sensible thing to do, right? There is a reason that herd animals stay in a herd and run in a herd. And it is, from an evolutionary perspective, it is the
Yeah.
best way to protect yourself. And at its best, it is a strength of the legal profession. Like if we assume the whole value of laws is that they provide an element of stable underpinning to society, an element of certainty, right? Laws are about the adequate levels of certainty that allow us to then act. In my opinion, and there's lots of actual philosophers who would say it's something else, but to me, that's a big part of it. So actually, sometimes the fact that it takes a long time to get moving on change can be a positive thing, because you are providing maximum stability and certainty across the population as to what will happen and what will change. So in that respect, that can be a good thing. And if then once the momentum goes, you are all able to run en masse, that allows that transition to be happening more effectively. So there it can be a good thing, right? And I think then take it back to my experience, where I'm mostly, an in-house lawyer. I had like 18 months in private practice, but in those 18 months, I was seconded into private practice. So I was like, I'm here to learn. I'm not here to fight for attention. It was almost the opposite of a cuckoo's nest, right? It's like they were all fighting for all the food, and I was just sat there chilling and saying, this is fine. Teach me, right? And I don't need to worry about the politics. I don't need to worry about the reaction. So it was very good for me. But I still have experienced in in-house, as an in-house counsel, that desire to flex to the business need and to run with the business. And I think that at its worst, that can be a really negative thing. And it means that we start abandoning our legal professional duties. And I do think there is a difference between a lawyer and someone who happened to go to law school. And I think there should be.
Mm-hmm.
I think professional integrity has to be, even as we move forwards into something, even if we reach a point where AI is doing 99% of the stuff, our professional integrity then becomes one of the defining elements as to how we stand tall as a profession. But I think even allowing for that, I think that wanting to run with the client's intentions and the client's interests, I think is a good tension to have, provided we acknowledge it and are aware of it. And that's a large part of how I see this 5 beasts idea. Is it's not saying therefore do X or therefore don't do Y. It's saying just acknowledge it in yourself, and then different scenarios that you find yourself in, you can play with it a little bit more, and you can play with how you want to apply that metaphor or simile or whatever it is to your exact circumstance. If we then take that in terms of the leopard, this desire to be different, again, the desire to be different can be a really positive thing. And there are times where the legal function does sort of stand alone, and it is good and healthy that they are standing alone and sort of holding firm. So there are times where we should cultivate and nurture that mindset. I do think, though, and coming back to your point about AI, I think there's this really interesting point, and I know I'm one of them, right? I had a chance when I left Reckitt. I spoke to some legal operational consultancies, and I didn't work for them. I set up on my own. Why did I set up on my own? Because I'm a difficult bugger who didn't quite like the spotted pattern that those little legal operation consultancies were trying to promote. And I wanted my version to be the right version. And this is something that I saw, like in a multinational with in-house lawyers, the amount of individual projects that are coming up all the time. And it's like, well, why aren't you just leveraging what the French legal team have done or what the
Yes.
US legal team have done? It's like, oh no, because it's different, because my laws are so fundamentally different. It's like, really? Marketing law, don't lie. Contract law, do what you said, right? And yes, there are nuances in there. And yes, we have an obligation to understand the nuances. But actually, is it really so fundamentally different? You need a fundamentally different concept. And it looks at, CLMs. Why are there so many contract lifecycle management tools? All of them are saying this is exactly how things are. And it's like, mate, one of the interesting things about law is that we cover all industries. Within every industry, there is an industry culture, but there is also a company culture. And actually, within any company of more than 300 people, there are cultures within that culture that can be fundamentally different, right? Like the role of the leader and the individual, or the circumstance or the prevailing mindset of the people who choose that functional profession is always going to change how people approach things. When you have a contract lifecycle management tool that says, oh, I understand the legal experience, it's like, at best, you might understand 0.5% of the legal experience. Like, I refuse to accept that I understand more than 0.5% of the legal experience, right? And I feel that I've managed to see a reasonable amount of stuff, and I've worked cross-functionally and worked across industries and, worked across countries, but I've still not seen it all. So to me, this is the manifestation of that, the negative aspect of the leopard, of that whole like, well, because I can't see this perfect application of my exact patterned coat, I must go solitary. I must go it alone. Right. And so at its best, it creates that stability, it creates that strength, it creates that sense of purpose. At its worst, you're just being difficult, and you're just being different for the sake of being different.
Unfortunately, my brain keeps wanting to take the metaphor further. I was going to say,
Go.
but I can also drag more than my body weight up a tree. You know what I mean? There comes like great motivation, I think, with the leopard metaphor. But I think it also, these things and all of those tests teach us that you can be more than one thing at the same time. You don't, life is not binary. You're not a
Yes,
leopard
yeah.
or not a leopard. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, and yeah, again, for similar actions, you can choose to be something different, and you can say, well, what do I
Yeah.
need to bring out
Yeah.
here in order to deliver at my best, or deliver at my most adequate, or whatever.
Yeah.
It's
And that's, I mean, that's mindfulness, is understanding what's inside of you and then picking the right tool for the task.
yes. Yeah. And also, and working out like, how can I flip this? Right? Often I feel anyway, when I'm finding myself leaning towards a certain thing, even if it's having negative connotations, there's something that's driving you in that direction. So I'm not saying blindly follow your gut and start directing that way, but say, well, something's taking me here, right? Something is causing me to want to run with the herd. Now, is that something that I should lean into and work out how to optimize, or is it something that I should be leaning away from? That's the next question. It could be either. I do think with the buffalo element, for example, if we accept that there are different types of herds, right? So in the same way I said there's different mindsets within a company, within industry, this kind of thing. Certainly, if you flip the herd you're trying to run with, that can often be a good way to gain strength. So rather than saying, I must slavishly jump around to whatever the sales team tell me to do, despite the stress levels that I'm having, if I take my herd to be the legal profession, or if I take my herd to be the company's interests as a whole, as expressed through the company strategy, and actually that's the herd I'm running with, you can actually get a lot of comfort from that, and that can still be a positive thing. Yeah, there's often different ways that you can look at it and play with the idea, but it's a lot more fun when it's animals than when it's abstract concept.
That's true.
Where would you say we see the rhino come out in lawyers and law firms the most?
So I'm always wary of speaking to law firms, right? Because like I said, I was a trainee at the time. I was pure like head down, do the work, learn, get out kind of thing. So I don't think I saw that manifestation of behaviors. But in terms of that rhino, so if we say like the negative aspects of the rhino, this is this sort of short-sighted tendency to charge. I think that the most obvious place you see that is in contract negotiation. And you get some incredible contract negotiators who are lawyers. I think some of the best contract negotiators I've seen were not lawyers. And I think that we often, lots of people apparently want to be Harvey from Suits. I personally find him to be one of the most obnoxious human beings I've ever seen on screen. But like, what do I know, right? So I'm just going to throw that in as well. There you go. So when we think about that short-sightedness, I think again, I did this particularly early in my career, is that you start trying to win the point rather than trying to win the longer term solution. You start trying to prove something for yourself rather than seeing the benefits for the company. And once I stopped doing that, I found that I was a far more effective negotiator, like order of magnitude more effective as a negotiator. And there's lots of different angles in terms of that thinking more long term. So you've got the thinking more long term that a lot of people do talk about these days, which is thinking long term in terms of the company interest, the relationship, and how you impact the relationship. I think there's another aspect of thinking long term in contract negotiation and contract playbooks and templates and drafting, which is where you're saying, how is this realistically going to cash out? So take, for example, the question of acceptance and rejection on a multiple order contract. So something where you're regularly, every couple of weeks, you're ordering the same thing. Even with the most onerous acceptance and rejection terms, the idea that over a 2-year relationship or 3-year relationship, you're going to get caught out on that hook over and over again, assuming that your obligations to order are framed in the right way. The idea that's going to turn into a contract dispute where you've got hundreds of thousands of legal fees, if not millions of legal fees being spent, it's just never going to happen. It's just not going to happen, right? In the majority of scenarios, like even in the world, we keep hearing about this VUCA world and people saying, oh, all this stuff from tariffs and things like that. And all the lawyers have piled in behind it saying, oh, look, check your contracts, right? It's like your contract is your worst line of defense here. right? I'm not saying it's not a line of defense, but in a lot of these scenarios, when you think through the implications of these clauses, it's not going to happen. And this is where, like, Sarah Fox is a great example where you still need a sharp understanding of the law. And certainly, like the area she sits in, construction, that's where you are far more likely to have a dispute than anywhere else. And she's still saying 90% of these commitments are actually not commitments that, when you think through long term, are actually going to be on the hook. So that's what I mean. It's not just short-sighted in terms of how you behave in the negotiation room. It's also that thinking long-sighted as to when human beings are involved and the range of commercial interests, or the realistic range of commercial interests, and including personal pressures like annual bonuses and desire for promotion and all this kind of stuff. When all of that is being applied, will this clause matter? And I think that once you start thinking through that, sometimes you say, yeah, it does. And I'm going to have to draw a line in the sand, and I'm going to have to be that lone leopard, and I'm going to have to stand tall and stop everyone, or however you want to frame it. But there are other times where you say, this is fine, and you move on. So I'd say you also see it again at its worst. I think I've seen the way in-house lawyers speak to their internal clients. I've seen them speak in ways that I felt are almost on the cusp of unethical. And so condescending, so patronizing, so ready to assume that their client is being naughty. And I think that this is something that is particularly problematic in-house. And again, it's understandable, right? Why is it happening? It's happening because in-house lawyers are under pressure. They're tired. They're trying to manage multiple laws, many of which I'm not sure they fully understand. And they're constantly trying to be that asset to the business and all this kind of stuff. But what it turns into is this lawyer as babysitter, lawyer as police officer mentality that sometimes has a place to play. But when you are jumping immediately into a presumption of naughtiness rather than ignorance, or rather than a difference in alignment of priority, you are not creating an environment where you're going to be able to resolve the question. Whereas and I think that is, again, that short-sightedness, that like, oh, that person is not coming to me early with the contract. They just want to bounce me into it. And it's like, no, they have some other priority. Your role as a lawyer is to act in your client's interests. Step one in acting in your client's interests, to my mind, is to assume that they have a reasonable opportunity to articulate their interests, and that you need to understand what they think their interests are rather than deciding for them. And so I think that, that can apply to policy. It can be, and how we build policies. It can apply to how we build processes and how we interact with people. So that's all the negative sides of the rhino. I think at its best, the rhino is steadfast. It's strong. It's something that you want it on your side, right? And there are times where it's got pointy horns. Yeah. We don't want lawyers that are horny. Obviously, there's been all kinds of problems there.
No, but now you're displaying the presumption of naughtiness.
This is true. But like, I have had times where I remember, like, one of my proudest moments was when I had an SVP turn to me and say, I want you wheeled into the room at exactly this point. And I knew that I was going in as the rhino, right? I was going in there as someone who'd stand there, stamp his feet a little bit, scare the crap out of people, and then move on. So again, as a mindful choice, that is fine. But I think that when it's not a mindful choice, it is actually, you're just starting a fight for the sake of starting a fight.
Yep.
That's when it's not healthy.
So the elephant, apart from eating it in small bites, which I have no desire to do, I do not understand that expression.
I'm not sure why they picked elephant out of all the things you could eat, like, or not eat.
It rolls in the mud, man. And it's got this sort of leathery skin. Have you seen the backside of an elephant? I'll send you a picture.
Well, so the elephant persona is the one that is where I'm going sort of less metaphorical, and then I'm just riffing off the elephant in the room concept, right? When you're a generalist in-house lawyer, necessarily you have to act when you don't have a full understanding of every law, because there's so many laws out there, right? I mean, I was talking to someone the other day, they wanted my opinion on their planned AI tool that would instantly summarize every law in the world and which one applies to you. And it was like, love the pipe dream. You are never going to be able to validate it. You're never going to be able to quality test that, even before we get into the inherent instability of LLMs, or maybe let's be kinder and call it the maximum stability of LLMs. Like, you're not going to be able to say this is every single law in the world and have enough confidence in the output. There's a reason laws exist, right? There's a reason we're here. So it's fine. It's fine that you don't fully understand the law. But I think that where it becomes problematic, there are two aspects where it becomes problematic. It becomes problematic where you have not gone through the relevant legal inquiry pattern to know what you don't know about the law, or to have a reasonable approximation of what you don't know. And this can pop out anywhere. So one example that really drove this home for me was when I was once dealing with a supplier that was going bankrupt in France. And so I started taking the standard approach to a bankrupt supplier in the UK. And luckily, I casually mentioned it to my boss during the general catch-up, and he said, "Oh, wait a minute, in France, there are certain actions where you adopt liability for the well-being of the potentially bankrupted company if you take certain steps. So you need to understand those steps and those risks before you do it." There are always going to be instances where you don't know something. I had failed, though, at that point in time to go through the right levels of inquiry to understand what I might be missing. And now, just that one act is enough for me to understand that actually, yeah, bankruptcy laws are often, because of the level of sensitivity from a policy perspective, that is often one of the areas where you're going to have the widest variance compared to, say, therapeutic goods law, which is mostly hinged off the back of an international treaty. And therefore, you're going to have broadly the same behavioral points, right? So
That
I
was a
think that,
very specific example.
well, I've got another one. Export controls for military goods is another one, right? It comes off the Batinov Treaty. But this is the thing, is that actually, if you understand why a law has been enacted, so a law's going to be enacted for broadly one of two reasons, right? Reason number one is all the countries agreed they'd do something. And reason number two is there was support from beneath to do something. Now, you could say there's a third one, which is where someone saw something someone else was doing and copied it, like, the copycats of GDPR or something like that. But
South
broadly
Africa
speaking,
and basically all of English law.
yes, yeah. There's two aspects where you can have this problem. So one of them is that, have you successfully gone through the relevant questions that allow you to understand the broad parameters? You don't need to do it with absolute precision, but the broad parameters of where risk might lie in what I'm doing. And I have seen many in-house lawyers, and I have done it myself without realizing it. And it's understandable because people are under time pressure, they're under budget pressure. But often I've seen them say, yeah, this should be fine. It's like, you have literally just advised somebody to do something that could end up in them going to prison, or that has a genuine possibility of substantive fines, like end-of-year results threatening fines. Conversely, you also have instances where you have in-house lawyers saying, no, you must absolutely do A, B, C, or they're being advised by external counsel, and I include Big Four accountancy in this list, where they say you must do X, Y, Z to comply with this law. And when you pick up and read the law, you say, doesn't say this anywhere. Like, this is absolute nonsense, right? And it's not just it manifests itself most in compliance. But if I had a penny for every LinkedIn post I saw that confidently made a statement of the law related to non-disclosure agreements that was absolute nonsense, I would have at least 10 pence today, right? Just from that. And it adds up, right? Compound interest is a wonderful thing. It's happening all the time. And I'm seeing people who I otherwise generally have a reasonable amount of respect for in terms of their ideas and how they manifest themselves publicly. And then every now and then I see them say something, and I'm like, that is just not right. That is not how force majeure works. That is not how damages work, right? And now I'm very lucky in that my training supervisor was an incredible stickler for that level of accuracy and detail. And so I had it drilled into me of like, I was not allowed to send emails until I was blue in the face because I was so frustrated that he was saying, no, you still haven't articulated that effectively. And yeah, he was arguably too conservative. He was too difficult in many ways. But what that did teach me is an appreciation that actually this clarity matters. And this is why the humans are important. And it's why the lawyers are bringing more value, is because we're supposed to push to that next level when it matters to do so. Another aspect of this, incidentally, in terms of understanding the law, is I think that there is a problem where, with a lot of lawyers, we are not thinking through the reasons behind the law, not just in terms of what I said as the provenance, but also just the basic human environment in which it arises. It's an understandable issue, because when you're learning the law between 18 and 21, if there's one thing I can guarantee you, around 90% of people between the age of 18 and 21 is that they know almost nothing about anything. So the idea
Yeah.
that at that age, when you're reading about two people believing in something, two people having a disagreement about something, the idea that you actually have the experiential, empathic qualities that allow you to take that off the page and manifest itself in reality is just unreasonable and unrealistic. So, and again, this is fine. I understand it. It's not these people's fault. We are pushed to university when we're 18, right? So it's not their fault they're doing it. It's not their fault that they often chose law because they were told by an uncle or an aunt, you're good at arguing, you should become a lawyer or something like that, which is, again, just this horrendous, again, I'm blaming Harvey from Suits, this horrendous misperception of what being a lawyer is actually all about. But even within that, the fact is that we are trying to get children's heads around complex ideas when in fact you wouldn't have divorce law if you didn't have the human pain of divorce. You wouldn't have family law if it wasn't for the human challenges of family, and you wouldn't have commercial law were it not for the human challenges of transacting, or corporate law were it not for the human challenge of trying to build a stable enough environment for yourself to feed your family or to achieve your personal goals or whatever it is, whatever's motivating whoever sets up the company. And so I think that when I talk about understanding the law, I'm not talking about saying, do I understand clause 5I of this act? Although I do think that is important. I think it's about, do I understand clause 5 of this act and the humanity that has given rise to this? And I think that a combination of the way that lawyers are first trained, and then the way that we very rapidly get sucked into that ecosystem, and then the way that we do not have adequate time to either understand what is written in the black letter or consider how that is likely to apply. I think all of these hold us back and prevent us from or limit the development of where we can be as a profession.
That was good. That was a good clip-worthy one as well. Need to remember that one. Need to start writing these down, really.
But to me, this is the elephant in the room, right? Because I see these posts on LinkedIn that say, oh, understand the law is just table stakes now. You need to do A, B, C, D. And it's like,
Yeah.
it might be table stakes, but people are turning up at the table and those aren't fucking poker chips, mate. Like,
Yeah. I was asked a question the other day about this, and I said, well, what you're doing is you're reducing a lawyer to a knowledge worker. We're not knowledge workers because we don't all know all of the law, but we have that pattern recognition, which is, I can only speak for South African universities, but it's probably true for universities in general, that they're not good at teaching that pattern recognition. And I think you're right. It is also because the people they're teaching have so little experience of life yet.
this is, I'm not sure it's the university's fault, right? And I think, again, if we
No.
think about like LinkedIn bingo, one post that regularly resurfaces is this: universities shouldn't be teaching, basics of contract law. They should be teaching dynamic, agile contract negotiation. P.S. Look at me, aren't I talented? And it's like, well, yeah, there's only so much the human brain can process, guys. It's like saying, oh, let's not teach a 6-year-old how to run up and down a playground. Let's teach a 6-year-old how to whack in an overhead kick in the World Cup final. It's like, what are you talking about? This is like, of course, like, I think what the universities are doing is about right. I do think that this weird culture we seem to live in today, where it's like, if you're not fully formed and being incredible by the age of 23, then you've got some kind of problem. When for me, like, I've
I'm
done
still not good.
my best growing has been in the last 5 years, and I strongly suspect I've got a lot more in the next 5.
Isn't the potential problem here, though, that, because I say it a lot now, which is once upon a time, knowing the law was everything. And I will say now it's like the foot through the door, because the people who come to you expect you to know the law. Isn't part of what you're saying, though, that it's the humanity behind it that actually makes it not just important to know the law, but actually know how to deal with that human element of it, to understand that human element of it. Otherwise, what we will end up with is just AI producing a document that doesn't take account of the human element of it, because it will just provide you with what it considers be the optimal, even if it's not actually optimal for that human being.
Yes, I agree. Completely agree. I suppose what I'm challenging is the way that we articulate that dichotomy. Because what I'm saying is that someone who can say, under the EU Trade Secrets Directive, this is the definition of confidential information, I'm saying that is not actually an articulation of the law. The only way you can truly say you have articulated the law is if you have talked about it in its natural environment. So actually it's not. So the test I used to run when I was talking to people about confidential information is I used to run what I'd call the WikiLeaks test, right? Which is, let's take this information. If I sent that to WikiLeaks and immediately emailed that to 10 of our competitors and then 6 days later told you what I'd done, you've got 3 possible reactions. One is, I'm really annoyed with you. The other one is, I'm annoyed with you and I'm speaking to legal. And the other one is, your face turns white and you start panicking and thinking, I need to find a new job. The third one is confidential information. The second one is probably confidential, kind of, be a bit careful with it. But that, to me, that is still, as long as I'm talking about what we can then do in that context, to me, without that, I cannot articulate the law any more than saying punching somebody might be assault, rather than being able to talk about the full context around it.
Yeah.
Allows me to articulate the law. So
Totally.
yes, I agree that people who say you just need to be able to spit out this, we should just get the database right or the source base right. Yeah, absolutely, they're wrong. What I'm not comfortable with at the moment is people say, oh, well, they're right about the law, they're just wrong about the application. It's like, well, no, hold on. If they're wrong about the application, they are wrong about the law. And I think that this then turns into another problem that we have as a profession, particularly in-house, which is where we seem to present commerciality and legal accuracy as though they're on a spectrum where you slide along from one to the other. And the truth is, to my mind, actually, you need both optimal in order to be able to say, I am giving legal advice. Because legal advice, as anybody who cares about the definition of legal privilege will know, is about the law and what ought to be done in the relevant legal context. That what ought to be done is still legal advice. It's still the law. And we need to stop saying it's commerciality, because by saying it's commerciality, we are presenting ourselves with a false choice, with an assumption that we must do one or the other. And actually, so it's bizarrely, it's creating loads of pressure on us to reject what we're supposed to be there for, but it's also reducing the pressure to actually be right. And it allows us to have this kind of this vague, abstract, vibey, oh, I'm sure it's fine, I don't care because I'm being commercial. It's like, no, mate, you're not giving commercial legal advice because you're not actually taking the law and applying it in the context, because you're seeing it as 2 distinct acts. It is a singular act. That's my opinion.
I've been waiting this entire time to sing do 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 lion sleeps tonight.
It's nearly impossible to hear that without going, oh, Wimbledon, oh, Wimbledon.
I'm pretty sure we haven't sung on this podcast yet.
Yeah. I'm sure that wasn't singing either.
I think I don't know if he's going to keep it in. And what I heard from your previous bit of conversation there is that I'm allowed to punch Scott in the face.
And there'd be some kind of uncertainty
context
about what exactly it was. Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I'll get away with it.
I'm not sure that I would say that I gave you legal advice on that particular matter.
No, but it is commercial.
Yes.
It'd be good for everybody. Okay. So back to the lion. I think the lion's our last one. I'd love to understand. I mean, a lot of me is lion, pride. But what does that mean in the legal context?
And someone did say to me, when you say lion, do you mean like one big fat guy with loads of hardworking women scurrying around them and bringing them food? And I think that, but I'm talking about in-house, not private practice, so I can't possibly vouch for that. But yeah, I mean, it's this pride thing, right? And again, I am very proud to be a lawyer. And as someone, I qualified very late. I was 33, I think, 34, when I got my practicing certificate. And I certainly, I grew up in a council estate in Bristol. The idea of becoming a lawyer was just completely alien to me, right? And so for me, there was this this mysticism around the profession that very much excited me. And I still very firmly want our profession to survive and thrive and to stand tall. And I think that is a good thing. I think, however, particularly when I look at in-house lawyers, I think often that pride causes us to overreach unnecessarily. And it links a little bit to what I talked about earlier, with this idea that we start seeing ourselves as platonic guardians, where our understanding of the law and its importance is so powerful that we actually can instruct our clients as to what their interests are. rather than allowing them to find it and acting more as an officious bystander. But it also comes in solutioneering. So I look at GDPR. I'm not sure that anywhere near the amount of lawyers that have ended up near privacy laws and data protection laws should have happened. I think if there was a law tomorrow saying you need to make sure that you pay national insurance contributions accurately or you will be fined 4% of global turnover, the lawyers would say to the HR and the finance teams, you got this right. And then they'd slide it over the desk and they'd run a mile. Because we don't, well, most of us would. You would get some law firms that would say, we're now going to set ourselves up as national insurance calculators and find ways to overcomplicate it. But the vast majority would run a mile. Right? GDPR was always a question of what is your information security. AI Act, again, I'm not saying there is no role for lawyers here, but I think that whole to the man with a hammer, everything's a nail. I think at our worst, that is what the lawyers do. And the amount of times I've seen, if we bring it back to legal operations stuff, the amount of times I've seen a policy that didn't need to exist because the business had it, a process that didn't need to exist or that should have dovetailed into it, a piece of legal tech where you're like, why does this exist? Like you've already got every single feature required sat there being run every day by the procurement function, the finance function, the HR function. And yet the lawyers have sat there and gone through this. And we got billions of pounds washing around for tools that are built off the back of the lawyers need to feel like they're the lion, to my mind. I'm not saying all of them. I'm not saying that I think all tools bring some value sometimes, although coming back to what I said a little while earlier, I think the idea that any tool can successfully articulate and represent more than a small percentage of the total legal experience, I think there's an element of hubris and pride in that belief as well. But I am saying that I think that often in-house lawyers, because for understandable reasons, we want our profession to be admired and respected and valued, we are often as a result over-baking what we're supposed to do. And I did a piece last year. It wasn't the 5 beasts. It was a talk at a conference where I was talking about the different hero archetypes in mythology. And one point that I was trying to make and hopefully made in that speech was that when I think about the people that have been most heroic to me in my life, they were never the hero character because by definition in my life story and my life journey, I'm the hero character. And yet they became heroes by not trying to be the hero. They were the ally or the trickster or the shadow or the mentor or the herald or whatever. And I think it's the same thing here, is that I think often our desire to be valued, our desire for the law to be so important diminishes how much value we can bring, when sometimes actually pointing out one thing and getting out the way can be the most valuable thing.
So then I do need to ask, in your bio, I talked about how you help legal teams drive simple and impactful change by applying structured thought models, whether it was policies, processes, playbooks, technology. When one of these things go wrong, when a policy or a playbook or technology goes wrong, which of the 5 beasts would you say is the problem?
It's a great question. I'm going to start with a lawyer's answer, which is it depends. If we look at, for example, templates take an alarming amount of time to get off the ground, unless you've got obviously a plain English guru like Elizabeth de Statler or somebody
Still
like that.
takes long.
Right? It's still really difficult. Right?
And it's a massive amount of effort. Like people think they're going to outsource it. And then I'm like, you can't outsource it. It's your template. I don't know what to put in it.
No, but this is it, right? Is they need to own it. As I've launched, I've been learning myself how best to articulate my proposition to people. But one thing that I've stopped being one of my core emphases, but it's still very much core to what I do, is saying, well, if you haven't actually thought through your true risk position and risk appetite to what you're trying to achieve, you can't produce anything. Because ultimately anything you do is going to be to an extent reactive. It might be running with the herd, where you're just picking up what everybody is telling you need in your template, your contract template. It could be that you're trying to produce over legal solutions when you don't need those legal solutions. So it could be that the lion is manifesting itself. It could be that you don't know enough about the actual circumstances and you're not able to play through how this will impact the company's longer term strategy and operational behaviors. So this is the rhino manifesting itself. But any of those can be a potential challenge. To pick one example, there was one job I did with an R&D team. When we really stripped back what they wanted from a new initiative they were coming out, the only thing that mattered was the intellectual property. And because for the counterparty, the only thing that mattered was the intellectual property, all of the clauses became about how do we do the intellectual property? And then as we thought it through, it was how do we present this to other people? How do we articulate this? And who is best placed to articulate it? So again, if we think about the lion, had the lawyers been presenting it to lawyers, the lawyers would have been thinking of 101 different risk points and pain points and failure points. But when you get a head of R&D talking to a head of R&D, and saying, this is what we want, this is why we want it, this is why it looks unusual, now go and feed your lawyer. That's going to drive far more success.
So at the end of each show, we ask guests 4 questions designed to get your thoughts on the legal profession as it is and how it could be, and to give our listeners some ideas of how they could possibly design their legal careers no matter where they are right now.
So question number 1 to you, Tom, what advice would you give a lawyer just starting out in the profession?
Okay, so it's a little bit of a difficult one because I'm aware that I came into a very different route, right? And everyone believes that they went through a specific path. I think that certainly the thing I was saying earlier about don't underestimate the value in really understanding the law and understanding how it applies and where it's come from and why it exists, I think is one part of it. Can I give a 2 other small bits of advice?
Yeah.
I think one of them as well is don't take yourself too seriously. I think that and it links back a little bit to the pride thing that I was talking about earlier, but it's that whole, actually, I always found that when I was comfortable making mistakes, I went through a period where I was very terrified of making mistakes. And I think once I was more happy to look like an idiot in front of people, they actually started respecting me far more and wanting me in the room far more. So I think that it doesn't mean go in and proudly and boldly say stupid stuff all the time. There are times, particularly when you're a junior, where actually, no, shut up and take notes, mate, and just get on with it. But I think that that's an important thing. And then the third big one for me in particular is don't underestimate how rewarding it can be managing people. And I think certainly early in my career, both when I was in the commercial function and when I was in when I started out in the legal function, I always wanted to be like the wolf in Pulp Fiction. I wanted to be like the sole guy who was like called in, came in, told people what to do, pissed off again, and was amazing. And I was a bad manager early on in my career as a result of that. And I think in some instances, I forgive myself, and it was understandable. And I had to go through that learning curve. But I can think of at least one hire in particular where I ruined the quality of that hire because of my bad management. And I will always, that's on my like top 3 professional regrets that I will always have. And later on, I was very lucky in that all of my peers gave me one of their highest performing lawyers to build a team around. So I had the genuine honor and privilege of having these people turn to me and say, I think this person's development will be best if they sit under you. And even though I was still quite a bad manager, but having that caliber of people under me, they kind of taught me how to manage more effectively as well. And that was the high watermark of my career. And the amount of things that I discovered about myself by managing a team of high performing, enthusiastic lawyers was just an unreal experience. So as we talk about this world where we say one day in the future, it'll be one person managing their 32 agents, it's like, great, mate, but actually you will lose something as a result of that, because trying to teach people, I think, really is one of the sort of highest honors that you can have.
What is the one thing about the legal profession you wish you could change, and how do you see that change happening?
So I think I would go back to something that I sort of talked about a little bit earlier, and what I like to call the regulatory industrial complex. And this is this thing where a new regulation comes in, and often there is not much wrong with the regulation because the regulation has been produced while it's been drafted by lawyers. The whole purposive intent, the exceptions and all this kind of stuff, these were produced by non-lawyers, right? They were produced by elected legislators. And actually, this is where the lobbying industry can be a positive thing. Like, I know it can, at its worst, the lobbying industry can do some horrendous things, but its best, it is a representative of different interests and what is realistic and what is feasible. But unfortunately, there are very few companies where actually the lawyers are in charge of that lobbying effort. It's the non-lawyers that are doing it. The law comes in, and then suddenly all of the external counsel, all the big law firms, the big 4 accountancy firms, they start smelling gold, and they start coming up with these incredibly complex, clunky, unrealistic ways to apply the legislation. And what began as deliberate marginal variability and willful constructive ambiguity in the legislation becomes, oh, you have to run this test on every single one of your suppliers, no matter which supplier you have. or you have to produce these 30 pieces of paperwork. And this comes back to a little bit as well to what I was saying earlier about what is the law for? Do you actually understand the law, or are you reading something cold and failing to understand the underlying human experience that is driving the need for the law and the correct activation of that law? And I think this is where we show ourselves to be worse as a profession, when we start driving people down that route and saying everything must be a law, the whole law as code movement. I think this is not healthy. It's not something that actually drives closer proximity between the population and the voting and the decisions as to how we want to be governed, and then how we are governed. It actually creates more of a fissure and a divide. So at our best, yes, lawyers are the last defense of tyranny. But when we pull out this regulatory industrial complex, the law is the first resort, the clunky prohibitions, we become people that unintentionally advocate for dictatorship, for cutting through laws, for not actually trying to apply human nuance. And so to me, yeah, that's the biggest thing we can do as a profession, is stand tall, be proud of what we do, be proud of what we bring to the table, but also understand that we are not the only people there. And that actually there are many differing views and differing perspectives that are necessary and bring that holistic value to society. And therefore, just dial it back and stop having these complex supplier onboarding processes.
What's a common myth about success in the legal profession that you feel needs to be debunked?
Okay, so I don't know if this is a myth, right? I don't know if it's fair to call this a myth, because there is an element of truth to it, but it's the whole commercial versus technical question. So, and it's those two aspects. One, I've already talked about, this point of people saying, "Oh, well, having a firm understanding of the law is table stakes. Every lawyer's got that. I can assume that interview. You can assume that about yourself. The question is, how do you evolve?" And it's like, no. It's just not true. The quality bell curve within the legal profession is the same as the quality bell curve among plumbers and violin players and independent legal operations consultants, whatever. Of course it is. And we seem to have this belief that we have this kind of everybody is amazing at understanding the law, and that the concept of legal understanding be separated from commercial understanding. And I think that it does us inherent harm to talk about it in that. So yeah, I'd like us to stop talking about it in that way. I'd like us to start elevating the law a little bit more, and at the same time acknowledging that we are on a continuous journey that is not a bit of a geeky burden, but is actually something that fundamentally needs to be refreshed and refined in order to underpin the value we bring as a profession, while fully acknowledging that it's entirely reasonable to say, well, actually, in terms of my own personal development, I don't want to be a lawyer anymore. I want to go off and be a salesperson or a supply person or HR. Fine, go do it, but don't call yourself a lawyer anymore.
So if you had to design an ideal legal career path, what would it look like?
So as I said earlier, I think no lawyer experiences more than 0.5% of the total legal career path. So it's one where I'm going to reject the question a little bit, because I don't think there is an ideal legal career path. I do think there are some things that have really helped me at different points in time, and some of it might be slightly counterintuitive. So I do think having a horrendous taskmaster for a limited period of time, where I was not binding my personality and my sense of worth and sense of self up in that person's approval, I think it was helpful to have somebody driving me that hard. I think, though, that those two caveats are fundamental for it to not lead to the levels of stress and strain that we see in the legal profession, where so many people are unfortunately captive. So I don't want this to be something that goes against the general message of Legal Off The Leash. I think the work you guys do is incredible. But I do think that at times, in the same way, when I had this high-performing team come in, all of them said, I've not had somebody checking my work like this for ages. And it was just for a period of time to create adequate frustration that they could then fly afterwards. Right. And so I think adequate frustration is a good thing. I do think some life experience is good. Like when I learn about contract law and tort law, I was like, we had that argument last week with a customer. We had that argument last week with a supplier. And that really lifted the law off the page for me. So I think some way to really get the law off the page, ideally before you're learning the details of it, feels to me to be a little more sensible and helpful. And as I said earlier, I think some element of personnel management. And obviously there's internal stakeholder management. I think so managing your stakeholders and learning how to do that, I think, is also very valuable. But I think managing people underneath you and working out what that says about yourself and how you learn about yourself, I think is very, very.
I love that answer. I think I'm going to have t-shirts made and it will say, everybody needs an asshole.
I didn't technically say that, but fine.
Yeah, well, everything's open to interpretation. Tell people where people can find you.
So I suppose I'm most active on LinkedIn. So easiest way to find me is look up my name. I have the fortune of being one of only 2 Tom Fleuriots in the world, as far as I'm aware. So, and if you type my surname in, I tend to appear relatively high. Although my mother, who has a PhD in computing, is above me on most Google searches for just the surname. So yeah, I'd say LinkedIn. I do have a website, floxham.com, but it's a broad summary of what I do in Floxham. So best way, reach out to me on LinkedIn.
And very quickly, Tom, tell people about your love for cheese as well.
Cheese is great. My wife is vegan, so she actually loathes cheese. So I feel slightly bad about it. Every Friday, I try to post 2 comparative cheeses, and in accordance with my love of following structure, there is a broad principle where I try to make sure they're 2 from different countries of similar types, with some kind of slightly left field accompaniment. Although sometimes you have to go with a pure accompaniment.
And can I tell you, not more than a couple of occasions, it has led me to go out and get some of the cheeses that you have been talking about, writing about.
Which ones?
Oh, don't ask me that now. I couldn't tell you. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head what they were.
We can't slide into a Julia Donaldson.
Yeah. I can't remember I'd have to look back, but it was really, really good. They were really, really nice.
Can I throw 2 recommendations out that I'm trying to promote to everyone who can hear them? So one of them is just generally, if you've got a mature, tangy, hard goat's cheese, pink grapefruit is we had pink grapefruit sat in the fruit bowl and no one else was eating it. I was like, fine, I'll eat it with this cheese. And it is an incredible combination. So I recommend that. And then the other one is aged feta. Now, you have to have a certain taste for it. You need lots of sweet stuff on it. So I had it with like balsamic crema, cherry tomatoes and pomegranate and a bit of black pepper. So you need something that's really sort of putting out, but aged feta, amazing.
I have to go cook now. No, for real.
No, they are really, really good. And they do get you because sometimes I've read them and I thought, oh, the market's just down the road. I'm just gonna pop down there and get at least one of them, or if not both. And I've done that on a few occasions.
I have high cholesterol, and I am feeling a very deep hatred of both of you right now.
So sorry, but you can just have do it Dutch style, like have a tiny slither of it, just for the little bit of taste and texture.
That's just not how I'm wired.
Yeah, who would do that?
The Scots not wired like that either.
No.
I've had to start because I started doing it and it started off as a joke because I'm from Edam, right? So Edam. And that's the only reason I was doing it. And someone said, you should call yourself the cheese lord. And I was like, I'm not calling myself the cheese lord because I know very little about laws related to cheese, right? So it doesn't make any sense. But I said, I will do this on LinkedIn. And I started out doing it and I started putting on weight. And so now I've got like 3 or 4 people that so I still do try the cheese, right? There's no magic, but there's no lies behind the curtain. But I'll only eat like a small amount of it. And then I quickly run it around to someone's house so I don't eat the whole thing.
Eat all of it.
Yeah.
God, I couldn't do that. Yeah.
It's hard.
Could
The
not.
aged feta, I ate a lot of aged feta that day. That went down very well.
So a big thank you to Tom for coming on the show and talking to us about the Big Five. We've been your hosts, Scott Simmons and Elizabeth de Stadler, and this has been Legal Off the Leash.